Hello! Today I want to talk about why your expectations are bringing your language learning down. But before we get into this video, I just want to let you know, if you're watching this in time, that you should most definitely join Grace and Space, because I will be sharing a session about expectations as well as seasons, shame, and distractions. So all of the stuff about languages that just doesn't get the chance, the time to be discussed, to have a moment to think about because we're so into vocab and grammar and faster and quicker and easier. This is a chance to just pause, take a little reflection, and then put everything that you learn into your language learning for better, more peaceful language learning. So your tickets for Grace and Space, you can get them in the description. You can get them at the link above my head. And yeah, I'll share more at the end. All right, let's get into it. When our expectations don't align with what's actually happening in our language learning, it can be more than enough to just bring down your motivation. So what I want to do today is talk about why that happens and the common reasons that I see for expectations being a real block for people. First up then, perfectionism. Now, if you struggle with perfectionism, you're much more likely to feel that pull of expectations than others. So it's really important that you know how to manage that when it comes along for you. The expectation that you'll have a perfect, quote unquote, streak on the app means that when you skip just one day, that can really derail you for way longer. The expectation that you'll study for hours on the weekend because you'll have time and then you don't can leave you feeling really like a complete failure. Or maybe it's the expectation that you'll learn quickly and easily that just has you feeling like an absolute loser when you're not fluent after a few weeks. A tendency for perfectionism typically leads us to having quite high expectations, and those high expectations are so high because they are perfect that they're very rarely met, because life is real and life isn't that because, you know, you overestimate. And there are strengths, don't get me wrong, there are strengths that you can find from your perfectionism, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about how the expectations from that can really just demotivate. And if this rings true for you, this idea of perfectionism, you definitely need to join me at Grace and Space. Unrealistic timelines. So whether perfectionism feels relevant to you or not, whether you can relate to that or not, something we can all relate to is the idea of an unrealistic timeline. And that, when it doesn't happen, expectation versus reality, not connected at all. Perhaps it's that you've overestimated how much language you can realistically learn within just a few weeks, because maybe you saw a YouTube video about someone who learned French in 4 weeks and you're like, yeah, okay, it's possible, I'm going to do it. And you try it and it doesn't work as well as you'd hoped because that timeline was slightly unrealistic. Now, that's not to say that it is not possible to learn a decent amount of language in a matter of weeks, but the title, How to Learn a Decent Foundation of French in 4 Weeks, is a little less catchy, so hence why we just get Learn French in 4 Weeks as a YouTube video. I also just want to mention that this is so common. This isn't just like a YouTube internet age phenomenon. This has been happening for decades, if not hundreds of years. I've got an old Spanish book on my shelf at home called Hugo's Spanish Self-Tuition Course in 3 months, open brackets, without a master, close brackets. So yeah, this stuff happening forever. And that series started in the 1890s, something like that. So really this isn't new at all. But when you set yourself an unrealistic timeline, what typically doesn't get included there is how much is happening in that timeline. So is it that you've got Learn French in 4 weeks and you're doing 8 hours every day for those 4 weeks? Because in that case, you're going to learn a lot more than if it's Learn French in 4 weeks, but you've got just 5 minutes a day in those 4 weeks. You'll still learn something, but it's going to be less than if you had 8 hours a day. Of course it is. Overall, deadlines and timelines are really great motivators for some people, but they can completely mess with your expectations for others. Comparison. They say comparison is the thief of joy, and that could not be more true. Again, with YouTube and social media and the internet age, but also with just learning and knowing other people learning that language, you are bound to compare yourself once in a while, or perhaps more than once in a while. When you meet someone who's been learning Korean for half the time that you have, and they, in your perception, are twice as fluent, that can be really downheartening. But there's an optimum word there, perception, in your perception. What you see when you see someone use a language is just the tip of the iceberg. You don't see the countless mistakes they made during hours of study. You just see that little end result and you think, wow, they're amazing. I could never be that amazing. Oh my goodness. And your expectations leave you and your motivation to fall down. And besides, no two experiences of language learning are ever going to be the same. So comparison is a completely fruitless task. It does not get you anything. It's impossible to compare like for like with language learning. And one final point on this, for everyone that you look at and observe as doing better than you, there is likely someone else looking at you thinking, wow, they're doing better than me. There's just this cycle, and wouldn't it be amazing if we could break it? Ignoring small wins. When your expectations are high, your focus tends to be on those big wins, the big you did it, you're now fluent wins, rather than the you mastered that one tricky pronunciation thing, now you're closer to being fluent wins. However, when we do this, when we focus only on those big wins and ignore those smaller wins, our expectations are never met. We will never be satisfied with our language progress. And this does not make us want to do more. This demotivates us and we either lose steam or stop and give up altogether. Burnout. So especially going back to the very beginning, if you're prone to perfectionism, the idea of having these really high expectations may lead you to overworking and potentially burning out. Overworking yourself with overly intense study sessions without adequate breaks can exhaust you, making it harder to retain information. And you know what's coming? Naturally, when we burn out, we lose motivation and we either slow down or stop altogether again. Lack of patience. So back to this idea of expecting that we'll learn quickly and easily. When that doesn't happen, we then become demotivated, but potentially also quite impatient. And as any good language learner knows, patience is key. It is an absolutely essential skill to learning a language well, because you are going to make mistakes, you are going to mess up, you are going to need to ask people to repeat things multiple times, and all of that stuff requires patience. Fixed mindset. Now, so far, pretty much everything we've talked about is when we have high expectations. So this one is interesting because this really comes into play when we don't have high expectations, but low ones. Now, you may have heard of the idea of fixed and growth mindset developed by Carol Dweck. Now, here's an example to show the difference. Let's say you fail at a test. A growth mindset response to that would be something like, okay, this is great because this shows me the gaps in my knowledge, where I need to focus on, what I need to study next. In comparison, a fixed mindset response would be something like, well, I knew it, there we go, this is proof I can't do it. And if your expectations are aligned with a fixed mindset, perhaps believing that language ability is this innate thing that we have in our genes and only certain people are magically talented at it and maybe you're not, then, well, you're probably not going to do very well. On the other hand, if you opt for more of a growth mindset and recognize that learning happens through lots of practice and lots of mistakes, and that's when success comes, then you'll be much better at learning languages. Neglecting fundamentals. Sometimes when our language expectations are too high, we think that we should be at a higher level, a more advanced level than we are now. So maybe we skip ahead and in the process, skip some of those fundamentals that we need to know before we get to that advanced point. This creates gaps in your knowledge, which in itself isn't a bad thing. It's very natural. It's going to happen no matter which way you learn a language. But when we're always working and striving towards the more advanced stuff because we think that's where we should be, and we're skipping those fundamentals and making more of those gaps, we're not giving ourselves a chance to fill those gaps. So sometimes we need to put our expectations to one side, relax. We are at the level we should be right now, and just recognize, okay, what do I need to work on next? Looking backwards rather than looking forwards. Inflexible goals. If your expectations are time-bound, then this can sometimes lead to your goals being a little rigid. And this is something that can lead to those neglected fundamentals that we've just discussed, because you feel like you're constantly needing to be chasing the next thing. And of course, this can even lead to a general resentment towards the language because it just isn't going as well as you'd hoped. And if it's not your fault, it's the language's fault. And if it's not the language's fault, it's your fault. And not productive. Rigid goals that don't allow for life's unpredictability can be strangling. On the other hand, a bit of flexibility can be really, really important and just create a much more relaxed and enjoyable atmosphere. Pressure and stress. Don't need to say much on this. You probably know that being pressured and feeling stressed aren't exactly very productive learning environments. When we're feeling pressured, it's that same thing as the rigid goals. We're moving on too soon. And when we're feeling stressed, we're just not remembering stuff as well or learning at our best. And finally, lack of enjoyment. When our expectations are too high and it feels like this constant race, it just isn't always enjoyable. And language learning should always be enjoyable. You know what I say by now, right? Successful language learning should always be functional and flexible and fun. And if we just focus on the functional and ignore the rest, especially the fun bit, then it is just no bueno. We're not setting ourselves up for good long-term language learning. So then, what can you do if your expectations are bringing down your language learning and you can relate to one or maybe more of these reasons that we've just shared? You can join me at Grace and Space this year, because at Grace and Space this year, I will be sharing a whole session on expectations, in particular, diving into how we can move past the expectations of others and create much more positive and productive expectations that are our own expectations, which is just huge. There'll also be sessions on seasons and shame and distractions as well. And with your Grace and Space ticket, for the first time ever, I'm really excited to be offering this. You're going to get access to an entire week of group support via a tool called Voxer. So this is asynchronous support. Nothing this year at Grace and Space is live, so no time zone translations, nothing like that to worry about. And the support is no different. Voxer is like WhatsApp, but without having to give out your phone number to strangers and have the distraction of 17 different group chats. So without those distractions, you know that you'll be able to focus and get your questions answered, learn from others, learn from me for that whole week that we're together. And yeah, just really, really excited to be able to add this in for your Grace and Space experience this year. And if you're like, Grace and Space this year? I've never heard of Grace and Space. I'm new here. What's this all about? Grace and Space is an annual event that I've hosted since 2021 now. And it's really just a chance for language learners who want to do better, but are sick and tired of the hacks and the tips and the tricks style of language learning and the hustle of it all, and just want peaceful, enjoyable language learning without that hustle. It's your chance to take a moment to learn more about how to learn languages and then return to your language learning with a fresh sense of self-compassion and support, rather than just your head full of stuff that you think you should do that is actually going to stress you out. Grace and Space tickets cost just $35 US, which is amazing because we have 4 sessions. And like I said, that whole support week, I don't sell this anywhere. So this is the only place to get that. So you can get your ticket up here, above my head, or down in the description. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you at this year's Grace and Space, and I will see you very soon. Bye. Oh yeah, like, subscribe, all of that stuff I'm supposed to say at the end.